from time to time on this program, ponder the future of journalism and hope that that phrase is actually a living phrase, that journalism has a future. Our next guest, we haven't talked to him for a while, I'm looking forward to it, is Michael Hiltzik. Michael is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist for the Los Angeles Times. He's written there for 3 decades. He's the author of a number of books as well. He has served as financial and political writer, investigative reporter, technology writer and editor, and foreign correspondent. And he now writes a column there where he recently wrote about Gannett, the newspaper chain, and what he calls a vulture firm's bid. And what that shows about the value of newspapers, which I think is primarily for economic scrap, but he'll tell us. So first of all, Michael, thank you for coming back on the program.
Happy to be here.
So you wrote this piece, which I found extremely interesting. You know, there's always this part of me that, since I want journalism to survive, as hopefully most people of goodwill do, that whenever I see a bid for a newspaper chain, my first reaction is, oh good, you know, somebody thinks it's still worth something to be in the newspaper business. But then, as you point out, those bids more and more are turning out, look more like somebody, I don't know, buying a sinking ship for the scrap metal before it's even gone down, instead of investing in like fixing the hull or whatever, to abuse the metaphor. So is that what's going on here, that somebody wants to just get rich quick from a newspaper chain but kind of destroy it in the process?
Yeah, the bid for Gannett, which came on Monday, though it was telegraphed a little bit earlier, came from an outfit called Alden Global Capital, and this is basically a vulture fund which buys devalued assets and then squeezes the life out of them until there's nothing left to squeeze. And Alden, through a couple of subsidiaries, owns something in the neighborhood of 200 publications in the country, including the Denver Post, and then something in the neighborhood of 38 medium and small newspapers in California: the Orange County Register, the San Jose Mercury, the Los Angeles Daily News. These were at one point or another very creditable publications. The San Jose Mercury used to have 400, 450 journalists in its newsroom. Of course, that was during the heyday of Silicon Valley, or the dot-com heyday in the 90s. It's now down to something like 40. And Alden has been laying off people in all of these publications, or most of them, ever since it acquires them. So its business model, plainly, is essentially to extract whatever residual value is in these enterprises until there's nothing left. It buys cheap, it makes the assets worth even less, and it pockets the difference until it's over.
Yeah, you know, the feeling I had reading your piece, Michael, was that but correct me if I'm wrong, is that almost what they do is they see newspapers as businesses that are on a downward slope in terms of revenue, which, you know, I guess you can't argue with, and that they sort of want to outpace that slope by cutting it so quickly that they can make a short-term profit while I would think even accelerating that loss of revenue. But as long as they can cut faster than the revenue falls, they're going to make a short-term profit, even if they kill the newspaper in the bargain. That was kind of the big picture I got of it. Was I off base? Or
well, that's true to a certain extent, but I think they've made a more cynical calculation, and that is that the newspapers they bought, basically they focus on print publications, and to the extent any of these publications have been trying to make the necessary transition to digital news distribution, they shut that down. In fact, in their bid for Gannett, they said explicitly, we're going to stop Gannett's investment in digital assets because we don't think it's worth it. But the cynicism of this is that they know that the readership, the print readership of these newspapers is older. it's aging. And I can tell you from personal experience that uh, many of the readers who still want their newspapers in their hands every day, it's just not in their lifestyle or their habit to go online to get news. So they're devoted print readers, and they will continue to be devoted print readers as long as there's a print product. Alden's calculation is that they can cut the quality of the news report by eviscerating the newsrooms, and they won't lose that much of that residual subscriber base. So they'll keep it, they'll cut costs, they will fire, half the newsroom or some huge percentage, and that the readers will sort of hang in there. They won't be happy, but they're not going to abandon their newspapers until they're gone and the newspapers are gone. And if you have an average demographic that still reads newspapers in their 60s, then you can hang on for maybe another 10 or 15 or 20 years or more, and you don't have to give them anything that's worthwhile because they're not going to go anywhere.
That gives new meaning to your use of the term vulture capital, because it's, I normally think of a vulture investing firm, as most people do, as being waiting for a company to die, but this is actually waiting for the readership to die too, and making whatever revenue you can in the bargain. So is this kind of thinking the reason why, I used to love, when I went to different cities, to read the local paper there, to find out what was happening locally in that city, to see how they covered national stories that I might have been reading in the LA or New York paper, Washington paper. And now when I go to different cities, Denver being one of them, or Dallas, or what have you, that it's depressing to pick up the local paper, because it seems that the page count is way down. I can't quantify that, but my impression is page count is way down, individual reporting is way down. And is this the reason why?
Well, it's certainly part of the reason. I think I've had the same experience you have. I mean, we're not talking about necessarily Washington or Los Angeles.
Right.
But in most, or in many mid-sized communities, reading the local paper is a dismal experience. You might find a couple of things that are interesting, but you're more likely to be fed a combination of pretty inadequate reporting and writing, and sort of spoon-fed reporting from the chain ownership. And frankly, Gannett has been guilty of a lot of this. I mean, if you travel to a community that's only got a Gannett paper, you're going to see a lot of stuff that comes from Gannett centrally and isn't relevant. It doesn't tell you anything about the community you're in. Right. And then you get sort of dribs and drabs of local coverage. And I don't want to, look, there are journalists, reporters and editors in all these communities who are doing a valiant job. But they're doing it with, more headwinds every day. That makes it more difficult.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, that was my impression of Gannett, although I do remember that in the 2000s, the National Gannett staff did some good reporting on war issues, if I recall correctly. But, I get what you're saying. I guess I would say now that if we have newspapers that are on a downward trajectory, if we have the strategy of just relatively short-term exploitation of them as a print medium, devaluing and degrading the product along the way, and not investing in digital alternatives, is there anybody out there you can think of who's actually doing an interesting job of trying to do newspapers the right way in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think there are pockets of encouraging developments. One that was pointed out to me by Ken Doctor, who's the news industry analyst who I quoted at some length in that column. The Star Tribune in Minneapolis it faces these same pressures as everybody else, but it still has retained its readership and its quality, and that's because it still has a couple of hundred journalists in the newsroom. That's, I think, the key. One of the issues that's been raised quite justifiably with Alden is that they don't have to cut as ferociously as they have cut. They're basically they've got operating profit margins that are enviable in the newspaper industry. In some of these newspapers, they're earning 17% operating margins. They don't have to eviscerate the newsroom to have respectable profits. They just do it because that's what comes naturally to them. And what's, I think, really frustrating about their model is that they take the money that they've extracted from the newspapers and they've invested it in a lot of questionable other investments, some of which have gone south in a big way. And we know this because some of their clients, a group of hedge funds that invested with Alden, has sued them for taking money out of one pocket and putting it in things like a failing grocery company. They bought into a grocery company called Fred's at the price of $17 a share a couple of years ago. Those shares are now trading for $2. Mm-hmm. So you look at Alden and you say, well, gee, they must be geniuses to, at what they're doing. But that doesn't entirely seem to be the case. They're basically draining all of the assets and resources out of the newspapers they're buying, and they're putting them in really ridiculous investments or into their own pockets. And as a result, the communities that these newspapers served are getting no service.
So, yeah, I'm struggling with this next question because I guess it's legit to take money from investors for a newspaper business and then take the profits from the newspaper business and invest them in completely different firms or ventures like the one you described, or mortgage-backed securities you mentioned, also in commercial real estate. But it doesn't seem right to me.
Well, it doesn't seem right because, first of all, they don't have to do that. I mean, if they really want to be in a business with a 17% operating margin, they don't have to be in newspapers. They can be in any, in any number of other industries. And newspapers, of course, to us, but I think to the readers, are a special case because they are a public service. They perform a public service. At least we all have the self-image of doing so, and I think it's justified. So to squeeze these publications so that they don't perform that service anymore, you have to ask yourself, what is the point? Why do that? Why not just go into another business? But I think the answer is that they know they have the customer base basically by the throat. The customers aren't going to go anywhere. There are a lot of newspapers out there that they don't own that they are willing to buy, including 100 that are owned by Gannett, where the pickings are going to be pretty rich for them and unfortunate for the readers.
And it's absolutely weird to go to their website, as you point out. It's literally just a flat page with nothing to click on, right?
That's right.
It's insane.
It's the most opaque website I've seen in a long time, right? You go on, you type in aldencapital.com or whatever their handle is, and you get this sort of photograph of a redwood forest, and up in the corner there's the Alden Capital logo, but there is nothing to click on. There's no entree into the website. You wonder why they even bother.
Right, it's like a building with no windows or doors. It's just,
and of course, they don't give interviews. They don't explain themselves. I put in a request. I mean, I found a telephone number in their SEC filings, and I called and I said I'd like to talk to somebody for comment, and I got basically transferred to a recording line, that beeped, and I left a message and never heard from them.
Maybe it's an artificial intelligence. It's so strange. Well, it's a fascinating story, Michael, and thanks so much for highlighting it, because it has, as you point out, significant implications for the future of an industry a lot of us care about and love. So thanks for doing that, Michael Hiltzik, and thanks for coming on the program. It's good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.